Hello everybody and welcome back to Gwiglet for another video on understanding Macbeth and exam success on the Shakespeare text. Today our lesson is going to be based around the rise and fall of our central character, our protagonist, Macbeth himself. And today we're going to be looking at each act and how Macbeth starts off as the Thane of Glamis, works his way up to becoming the Thane of Cawdor, and to becoming a bloodthirsty dictator. Now, what can you do with these notes today from this lesson? Well, first of all, it's important to make sure that the notes you do take are clear, are effective, and you can look back through them over the course of your studies. As well as this, you want to make sure that you are doing alternative versions of revision. For example, mind maps will be really effective and very useful in terms of what you produce, and will be very worthwhile going forward, making them particularly vivid and descriptive using today's information. From here, you can also use it as a revision tool, either for yourself to look back over the notes on the main character here, or with classmates as well. It'd be very useful to use as a revision tool in terms of group revision as well. Moving forward, you could also use it to help annotate a copy of the text. I strongly believe in using a lot of quotations in this text and in any of the texts in literature. So you'll find a number of them there. Feel free to pause the video at your own leisure and to take them down. And furthermore, using it to list examples, particularly today when we're concerned with the character of Macbeth. He comprises at least 70% of the lines, the vast majority of the plot, and the entire play is named after him. So it's important for us to gain an understanding of how he is not only takes the steps to rising to become King of Scotland, but also subsequently declines from there to his downfall, because it is a tragedy, and we will cover that idea of it being a tragedy in future lessons. So let's begin. Act 1, I've called it Macbeth the Troubled Hero. Now the important word here really is hero. Macbeth begins just as that. He is seen as defeating the anti-Duncan forces from Norway and within the realm of Scotland, and this is reflected in the quote here from the captain: "Brave Macbeth, well he deserves that name," from Act 1, Scene 2. Now what I pay close attention to here is the words that I underline within the quote. For example, notice the word brave here, the adjective there, reinforcing this sense that he is someone to be applauded, someone to look up to, a role model for those within Scotland. Now moving on from here, when Macbeth hears the witch's prophecies at first, he's unsure on whether to act on them. He's not entirely convinced at first. And this is seen in the quote: "If chance will have me king, why chance may crown me without my stir." At first there's this understanding from Macbeth that, well, if he just carries on his usual course of life and doesn't change the events that he does do, then surely he'll become King of Scotland anyway. He doesn't originally wish to carry out bloodthirsty regicide as he ends up doing. However, later on, when Malcolm is made Prince of Cumberland by his father, the King Duncan, Macbeth is heard to say, "Stars hide your fires, let not light see my black and deep desires." Notice that phrase there, black and deep desires. Those adjectives not only show that Macbeth acknowledges this isn't going to be a moral act he's going to commit, it could be very bad, it's going to have an impact on his soul and his legacy, but notice that word desires as well, like it's something he craves almost from this. And one more as we go towards the end of Act 1, he says, "I have no spur to prick the sides of my intent, but only vaulting ambition." Notice those phrases there, no spur, vaulting ambition. He's right on the precipice of regicide. He's about to murder Duncan, and he finds he can't, not only because Duncan is a good man, but just sheer ambition is the only reason he wishes to commit this. So we see that Macbeth really begins the play as a hero who becomes troubled by what the witches tell him. And it's this overwhelming power of the prophecies from the witches, as well as the power of persuasion from Lady Macbeth, that ultimately twists and corrupts his mind into committing the deed of murdering Duncan. Notice how Lady Macbeth in Act 1, Scene 7 says, "When you durst do it, then you were a man." In this scene, particularly when you read back through it, you'll notice that she's often putting this idea of manliness and masculinity into him. This idea that if he doesn't do this deed, if he doesn't follow through with it, then it questions his masculinity, something that triggers something within Macbeth and makes him say such quotes as "bring forth men children only." He's very committed to it from that point on. As we continue into Act 2, Macbeth becomes the almost traumatized schemer, is what I've called him here, a manipulator, but someone who is unable to hide the traumas of the act he's just committed. He begins the act hallucinating. "Is this a dagger I see before me?" Probably the most famous quote in the entire play. However, he only becomes decisive when he hears, at the very end of this scene, Lady Macbeth's signal, the bell ringing, and he says, "I go and it is done. The bell invites me. Hear it not, Duncan, for it is a knell that summons thee to heaven or to hell." Now you'll notice here that I've underlined the word invites, the verb invites, as if the action of Lady Macbeth ringing the bell to signal that the guards are drugged and asleep and he can freely go into the bedchambers is lulling him, is wooing him into doing this. Notice how his language, if you look, which would be on the wider scene, particularly the bits he says before this, his language becomes very reductive and very simplistic. "I go and it is done." Really simple language that shows that he's now lasered into committing this act. Now when he re-emerges from Duncan's chambers, we see that he is actually traumatized and he slips up. He brings the daggers with him. Lady Macbeth has to take them back, and the audience witness him say, "Will all great Neptune's oceans wash these hands clean?" He refers to the planet of Neptune, and all the oceans of it, would it actually erase the stain of guilt and the act from him? In Act 2, Scene 2, this trauma, a man who was so used to violence beforehand, when it's committed on someone innocent, we see him actually begin to fragment and fall apart. Now we notice also how he covers his tracks by murdering Duncan's guards in a fit of rage. Notice how I put that in inverted commas there. So when he's quoted as saying, "Oh yet I do repent me of my fury that I killed them," them being the guards, the fit of rage is premeditated. It's not really a fit of rage when it's concerning Duncan. What it really is, it's about covering his tracks so those that were accused can't do anything about it. Now as we reach to Act 3, Macbeth is the supreme ruler. He is at the zenith of his powers at this point. He has everything he could possibly wish for. He's the ruler of Scotland, and notice I've also said beyond. Remember, the king at this time was the manifestation, the physical personification of God. So it's important for us to remember how he is very much in a godly element here. Notice how Banquo begins the scene by saying, "Thou hast it now, King Cawdor, all." Very simple word there, but very effective. All. He has everything, both in the physical and spiritual realm. Okay, is the supreme being of the land. However, this doesn't provide Macbeth with fulfillment. Remember, he lacks a legacy, as per the witch's prophecy, where they say that he shall be king, but have none, to complete his power. He's quoted as saying, "Upon my head they placed a fruitless crown and put a barren sceptre in my gripe." The they here meaning the witches. Notice this quote, fruitless crown, barren sceptre. These phrases here are really, really important. We're talking here about the common symbols of being a monarch, the crown and the sceptre, the stick, as it were, for in layman's terms. He's saying here, by them being fruitless and by them being barren, that he's commenting on the language of fertility, that he can't actually become a ruler with a legacy. So he's at the peak of his powers, but he's mournful with it. He doesn't feel fulfilled. Then what we see is that Macbeth begins to resort to assassination of Banquo and his son. He's now willing to murder innocent people, innocent children. But his language here shows that he cannot bring himself to fully acknowledge or say such deeds. As quoted here, he says how to the murderers, "I require a clearness, leave no rubs nor botches in the work," which is also in Act 3, Scene 1. Notice here how he says, uses euphemistic language, a clearness, no rubs nor botches. He can't bring himself to say the actual act itself of murdering a child here, so he has to resort to language that softens the impact and blow so it can put his mind somewhat at ease. Now moving forward, Macbeth begins to shut out his co-conspirator. Remember, Lady Macbeth helped plan, helped plot and helped to enact the murder of Duncan. And she has been a very significant part of the play up to this point. However, she's not remotely involved in the murder of Banquo and the attempted murder of Fleance, his son. And this is a point in the play that I often say to my classes that is really significant, because when Macbeth is quoted as saying, "Being innocent of the knowledge, dearest Chuck, till thou applauds the deed," he is building a wall between himself and Lady Macbeth. He is dividing himself from her, and it's this shut-off point where they begin to eventually stray from each other and they become more distant, and he becomes more isolated and more paranoid in his dealings. At the banquet scene, Act 3, Scene 4, one of the most significant scenes in the entire play, Macbeth is tortured by the visions of Banquo at this point. He's quoted as saying such phrases as, "Thou canst not say I did it, never shake thy gory locks at me." This idea here that Macbeth is taunted by the gory locks, the blood-caked hair of the dead Banquo, the ghost of him haunting him at what should be a state formality, a procession of his powers. Macbeth, at this point, once the banquet is corrupted and irreparably damaged, realises the scale of his actions. However, what we see here is Macbeth isn't some blind tyrant. He realises what he's done, but he chooses to go forward. He says, "I am in blood stepped in so far, that should I wade no more, returning were tedious as go o'er." Macbeth likens the victims of his reign of terror so far and the blood they've spilt to that of almost like a pool, that he's so wading so far into the blood of the innocent victims he's killed that it's almost as tiring to go back and atone for his sins and change than it will be to continue. So in that frame of mind, he decides to carry on. Now, as we continue into Act 4, Macbeth becomes this bloodthirsty tyrant. He has become at the peak of his powers. He starts to lose people, lose friends, and people who are co-conspirators to him, like Lady Macbeth that we just mentioned. And strengthened by the new 3 prophecies of the witches, however, when he visits them in the first scene, he now has no problems talking about murdering the innocent. When he mentions in Act 4, Scene 1 to seize upon Fife and give to the edge of the sword his wife, his babes, and all unfortunate souls, we see here that Macbeth is relentless. Macbeth is utterly careless about those he kills, about mentioning here a wife, children. He's openly saying this to slaughter people in the way a bloodthirsty dictator would. Now, Macbeth's actions have become widely known at this point, and he is despised by those he once ruled over. We see this in Act 4, Scene 3, when Macduff mentions bleed, bleed, poor country. He personifies the country of Scotland here and shows how Scotland is suffering under Macbeth's reign. A really important point here that reinforces just how bad, how deep, and how dangerous and deadly Macbeth's rule has become. Now, as we reach into the final act of the play, Macbeth comes across as both valiant and doomed. For example, he starts the act surrounded by Malcolm's forces in his castle of Dunsinane. Some of Malcolm's allies comment on how he seems determined to fight to the bitter end. A minor character called Caithness mentions how some say he, Macbeth, is mad. Others that lesser hate him do call it valiant fury. There's this real conflict within Macbeth at this point where we can see that he's doomed. He has lost so many people through his tyrannical rule, but in spite of that, he still wishes and is still determined to go ahead and plough on and will not surrender. There's this almost corrupted, perverse kind of honour in what Macbeth believes he is doing. And even when the prophecies begin to unravel, the sophistry regarding the trees that can't move and the other parts of the prophecies, for example, of no man of woman born that comes later, he's still committed to fighting. He says in Act 5, Scene 5, once he's realised Lady Macbeth has died as well and his forces are deserting and fleeing from him, blow wind, come rack, at least we'll die with harness on our back. This sense that whatever happens, whatever destruction and doom is laid upon Macbeth, he will go out fighting, whatever the consequences may be. And at the very end, we see his absolute downfall when he realises too late that he's been tricked wholly and fully by the witches in Macduff's revelation. His final words in the entire play reveal a man that's doomed, but insisting on fighting on the end until the very end. His final words in the entire play are, "Lay on Macduff, and damned be him that first cries hold enough." The sense here in Macbeth is that he's only determined to fight to the bitter end, regardless of what it may be. He realises all his chances are lost. Everything that he has worked for and schemed and plotted for has fallen apart, and now all he's got left, with his back to the wall, is to fight until his certain doom. So we see the rise and fall here of Macbeth. We see how he becomes, he starts out as a heroic soldier, how the witches and Lady Macbeth build him up or break him down into becoming a murderer, who then is not fully fulfilled in his role as king, and through shutting others out and through the continued murder of others becomes a bloodthirsty tyrant. So thank you once again for tuning in. Please like, share and subscribe the video to the channel, and leave any comments you'd like to on this video. We have our Twitter account here at Gwiglet as well, and hope you're all doing very, very well. Thank you once again for watching, and we will continue on our Macbeth videos next week. Till then, all the very best, take care, and bye bye.